Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Terumos, Chapter 2, Halacha 1. This is part 5 of the Shir, and the Art Scroll we're on 28.2. Today we're getting into the difference between deliberate violations of Jewish law and accidental violations of Jewish law, and in particular, we're going to get into what happens if you're ignorant, what happens if you don't know the difference, and then you violate the law. So when we were leaving off yesterday, we were talking about a baraisa where somebody separates truma from tamei produce on behalf of tahor produce, and Rabbi Yosei is saying whether he did it accidentally or whether he did it on purpose. What he did, and it's going to be valid after the fact. Although everybody agrees that you shouldn't do it, he's clearly disagreeing with the Tana of our Mishnah, who is going to invalidate the deliberate designation of truma if it's done on purpose. And the idea that comes up is that if you're going to invalidate these, then maybe the guy is going to say, okay, well, I really did separate out the truma gedola, and I don't have tevel anymore, and I can eat it. And everybody's saying that even an accidental eating of tevel, even if you didn't know it was tevel, is very serious. And if you're doing purposeful eating of tevel, you get death at the hands of heaven. But everybody agrees even to do it accidentally has very serious consequences. So the idea that Rabbi Yossi has is he's saying that, look, we should never allow it to turn back into tevel because people are going to accidentally come along and eat it. That's really going to be the sub-theme that comes up here. So the Mishnah taught in the counter to this that Rabbi Yudah said that if someone knew that a certain product was tamei, and then he forgot it was tamei, and then he illegally separated truma from the tamei produce on behalf of tahor produce, his truma separation is invalid. In other words, Rabbi Yudah is taking a very strict view here. And he's maintaining that even carelessly forgetting about the producer's state of truma is going to be judged as a deliberate violation. So you can see that's very strict. And the Gemara is going to question now the scope of Rabbi Yudah's very strict ruling here. And Rabbi Pinchas posed a question in the presence of Rabbi Yassi, says this Gemara, and says that so far we know that Rabbi Yudah judges an inadvertent violation as though it were deliberate. And the Gemara says when he originally knew that the produce was tamei, and then he forgot about the state of tuma, and then when he forgot about it, then he thought that the produce was tahor, and that's when he separated it. So the Gemara continues and says, what, however, is Rabbi Yudah's opinion regarding someone who knew at the time of the truma designation that the produce was tamei, but he made a mistake and he thought that it was permitted to separate truma from tamei produce on behalf of tahor produce? In other words, is Rabbi Yudah going to judge a sin resulting from ignorance of Jewish law as an inadvertent or deliberate sin as well? And are we going to say like this, where we're going to say that just as Rabbi Yudah judges as somebody who forgets the facts as being a deliberate violator, he's also going to judge somebody who's unaware of the law as a deliberate violator? Or are we going to say that Rabbi Yudah is going to distinguish between somebody who forgets the facts, and by the way, somebody who forgets the facts is going to judge as a deliberate violator, and somebody who's unaware of the law, he's going to judge as somebody who's just an unintentional violator? The question is, which is Rabbi Yudah going to say? And the Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Yassi says to Rabbi Pinchas that my master's query is valid because my master holds like Rabbi Yudah, who distinguishes between an inadvertent violation and a deliberate one. The Gemara says, however, according to Rabbi Yosei, that we just talked about in the Brisa a couple of minutes ago, he's not going to distinguish between an inadvertent violation or a deliberate one. In other words, he's going to be saying that both cases are the same. So when we're looking at it, Rabbi Yudah is going to be treating a violation due to ignorance of the facts more stringently than an inadvertent violation. And the the Tanakama does not treat, by the way, a violation due to ignorance more stringently than an inadvertent violation. So when we're looking at this, um, the question is, are there grounds to question whether a sin resulting from ignorance of the law is going to be judged as deliberate, or we're going to say that it's inadvertent? That's really what we're getting at. So according to Rabbi Yosef, that he's saying that what's done is done, and both cases are the same. And so he has a very, very lenient position. But it seems that the question of Rabbi Yehuda in the case of somebody who's ignorant about the law is unresolved. It's hard to know exactly what Rabbi Yehuda would be ruling on this. The Gemara, though, does give you food for thought, and the halacha is not going to be like Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah stated something else concerning someone who immerses utensils on Shabbos. Now, if you did so accidentally, you can use them, but if you did it on purpose, you can't use them. So again, we're going to be getting into inadvertent violations, purposeful violations, and then violations based on ignorance. So the Mishnah here, it's going to have a qualification. Gemara says it refers to large utensils, which are not normally used for drawing water. And it says that somebody can't immerse this kind of utensil because an onlooker will assume that they're immersed in order to be purified. You're not allowed to purify anything on Shabbos because you're changing it, and you're also completing a final step. You're not allowed to strike a final blow. So before it was not usable, and now you've turned it usable. So regarding small utensils, the Gemara says like a plate or a cup or a bowl, then those are commonly used to draw water. And so somebody can purify them by resorting to subterfuge for immersing them. In other words, that he can use it to draw up water. And by drawing up the water, he's really trying to get the water. He's not really trying to purify it. And if there's an onlooker, they're going to assume that they're being immersed not for purification, but for the sake of the water. In other words, the immersion is going to be permitted, and although it's going to be for the sake of purification, that's not how it's going to be perceived. And also, he's also trying to get the water. Now, this is a rabbinic prohibition against immersing tamei utensils on Shabbos and then turning them to hor, because it looks like you've repaired it, and it has this look that other people are going to look at it, and it's going to look like you repaired it, and you turned something that was unusable into something usable. This, by the way, is a rabbinic restriction. It's not a d'oraita restriction, and certainly if this was a d'oraita restriction, you wouldn't be allowed to do this. So the Gemara quotes a brisa in support of the statement, and Rabbi Hoshaya taught in a brisa that the following ruling regarding the immersion of utensils on Shabbos, where it says a person may fill a tamei utensil with water from a well and resort to subterfuge to immerse it, and this agrees with the Gemara statement that somebody can immerse a small tamei utensil. So, in other words, the brisa does not specify which type of utensil he's talking about, whether it's going to be a small one or a big one. And the idea is that you can submerge a utensil on Shabbos, and to look at this, whether it's going to be a big utensil or a small utensil, what are we talking about? We're talking about a utensil that's going to normally be used to draw water. And so the Mishnah here is talking about large utensils which are not normally used to draw water. And so this is like a shinoi to sort of get around this rabbinic ruling. In other words, even for Maris Ayin, somebody's going to walk by, look at this, and it's going to look like, he's just, getting water out of the well. Not a big deal. So the Gemara is going to quote a brisa that finds another subterfuge to do immersion even for a large utensil. And the brisa says that if one's large bucket fell into the well, or one's large utensil fell into the well, he can also resort to a subterfuge to immerse it. In other words, he can draw the large utensil to the edge of the well and then sort of push it in and discreetly submerge it. And it will look like the bucket fell in accidentally. And this is also a way where, for Marasign, it doesn't look like you just, repaired this. Again, derabanan restriction, not the right to restriction. The right to restriction, you wouldn't be able to do this. The derabanan restriction. So the Gemara quotes another maloket among the Amorim on a related topic, and the Gemara says that there are two Amorim that disagree. One says that it's permitted to immerse utensils through a subterfuge, and that's going to apply to all utensils, both to utensils that are, that contracted tuma and also from an ava tuma, and also to utensils that contract tuma from a derived tuma. But the other one says that the permit to immerse utensils through subterfuge only applies to utensils that contracted tuma through a derived tuma, not through something that got tuma through an ava tuma, like somebody who touched a corpse. So the getting back to inadvertent violations and getting back to sort of like, are you allowed to do these things if you didn't know? Well, keep in mind, separating tameh from tahor, there's a opinion that the Rosh and the Gemara certainly has this maloket, whether this is going to be a derabanan restriction or not. The Rambam holds it the right to restriction, but the Rosh holds that this is a derabanan restriction. And this is even going to be a maloket going back to the Tanaim. So if all of this stuff with the tameh for tahor, for separations on Truma and Truma Gedola, if that's going to be a derabanan restriction, then you could see how, this plays out with, being lenient on inadvertent restrictions. And so that's how Rabbi Yossi is coming up with this leniency. But if you're going to say that the separation from tameh for tahor is going to be a deraita obligation, like what Rabbi Yudah is saying, then you're going to be strict. And so that's how we're coming up with these strictnesses. And it's still very unclear whether this is going to be a deraita obligation or a derabanan obligation. Again, you have the Rosh, and a lot of times the halachas are going to go by the Rosh, even over the Rambam. And then you have the Rambam. A lot of times things are going to go by the Rambam. So very hard to see which is which. And when looking at this, you have to look at, here, why are we talking about, the Mishnah talking about large utensils and accidentally dropping in? And, these are derabanan restrictions. And, you have like, if you're making it look like an inadvertent violation, can you use it, right? And over here, if this is going to be derabanan on separating tameh for tahor, well, if that's going to be derabanan, then again, it's going to look a lot like what Rabbi Yossi is talking about, but it might not be. So the second Amora is going to challenge the first on utensils, and the one who said that the permit applies only to utensils that contracted tuma from a derived tuma, asked the one who said that permit applies to vessels that contracted tuma from an ava tuma, again, like somebody touched a corpse. And it says that even if a utensil that contracted tuma from an ava tuma is immersed during the week, and then it requires nightfall before it becomes tahor, going to be like a tovel yom, which we talked about yesterday. And then even if it's immersed on Shabbos, it does not become completely tahor until nightfall, so that the immersion does not serve any immediate purpose. Rather, it's just a preparation for the following day. So how could rabbis even permit preparing this on Shabbos for the next day? And the Amora is going to reply to this, and it's a great question. And he says the permit applies to someone who wishes to use them. In other words, he's going to use this with chulin that's going to be in a state of tahara. In other words, that when you're talking about this shinoi, this roundabout way to sort of drop your cup in or your bucket in, and draw it in, either it looks like an accident or it looks like you're drawing water, and you're violating this, or you're getting around this rabbinic restriction not to purify your utensils. Well, what are you using this utensil for, right? You can't use it for truma because that would make it tameh, because nightfall didn't happen yet. You're not allowed to prepare something on Shabbos for the next day. Well, what about this? Well, you're allowed to handle chulin with it. It's going to be secular produce that has already, you know, it's already going to be in a state of tahara. You want to keep it tahor, and you already had the tevel taken out of it. You're allowed to handle that. So there's another case where subterfuge can be used to permit a rabbinic prohibition. And Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi, it says, a clever woman who wants to rinse a cup here in one part of her house, and a bowl there in another part of the house, and a tureen, which is going to be another kind of dish, in the third area of her house, and she's, spilling water over here. Really what she's doing is she's spilling water all over the floor. So what happened is that she actually laid water all over to lower the dust in the house on Shabbos. And how is that? Well, she used the pretense of rinsing her dishes. And, they didn't have, in more humble houses, it was built with a dirt floor. So what did she do? She kept the dust down. The Mishnah said that someone who tithes or cooks food on Shabbos, if he did so inadvertently, he may eat the food, but if he did so deliberately, he may not eat the food, and the Gemara is going to qualify this Mishnah. So Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Abahu that when the Mishnah differentiates between somebody who cooks food inadvertently on Shabbos and somebody who does so deliberately, it's talking about the inadvertent violation of a biblical prohibition or the deliberate violation of a biblical prohibition. In other words, somebody placed a pot of uncooked food on the stove on Shabbos. That's a d'oraita violation. But if somebody placed the pot of uncooked food on the stove before Shabbos, then that's going to be a d'Rabbanan prohibition. And the law is the same whether the violation is going to be inadvertent or deliberate. In other words, according to biblical law, if somebody placed the pot of uncooked food on the fire during Friday afternoon, and then he left it to simmer on Shabbos, this is shahiyah. And so the rabbis were worried that people who do this might unthinkingly stoke the coals to make sure on Shabbos that you had enough heat. So really what you were doing is you're kindling the fire on Shabbos. You're encouraging them to do it. So the rabbis prohibited leaving a pot of uncooked food on a fire, except in circumstances where it would be impossible for somebody to stoke the coals on Shabbos. So Shmuel is holding here that the ruling of our mission with regard to illegal cooking pertains specifically in cases where the offending act is going to be like putting a pot on the stove, and that's done on Shabbos itself. And then you actually violated a biblical prohibition, not a d'Rabbanan prohibition. Again, the sub-theme here is going to be that when you're separating out truma, that's going to be tameh for tahor for tameh, is that going to be a d'Rabbanan restriction, or is that going to be a restriction that's d'oraita? Everybody agrees that you can't do it, but the question is, what exactly happened in this law? So that's why these other examples are coming up. So the case that Shmuel is talking about is that this is going to be only true if the unintending violator is going to be doing this when he's doing a d'oraita violation. So in a case where somebody left the pot on the stove before Shabbos, then that violation is going to be rabbinic in nature. And then, the law is going to be, whether the person left the pot there by mistake or on purpose. So it's possible to say that in either case, the food's permitted since only a rabbinic law was violated. But if you're doing it where it's going to be, where you're violating it on a biblical level, then that's going to be a different category. So, the question is, Shmuel saying that this Mishnah is talking about illegal cooking specifically when you did it on Shabbos. That's how he's saying that somebody who cooks food on Shabbos, if he did it inadvertently, he can eat it, but if he did it deliberately, he may not eat it. That's why it's coming up with a strict ruling. So the Gemara is going to support this assertion, and Rabbi Yossi says that the Mishnah itself indicates this. It states that concerning someone who tithes or cooks food on Shabbos, if he did so inadvertently, he may eat it, and if he did it deliberately, he may not eat it. So in the case of illegal tithing, and again, that's what this Mishnah is talking about, illegal tithing, it's obviously talking about somebody who separates tithes during Shabbos. And by teaching this case together with illegal cooking, this Mishnah's holding, says Pnei Moshe, that this also is going to refer specifically to an act performed on Shabbos itself. And so we can conclude that when the Mishnah is differentiating between somebody who cooks inadvertently on Shabbos and he does so deliberately, the Gemara says it's referring only to the inadvertent violation of a biblical prohibition or to the deliberate violation of a biblical prohibition. In other words, that we're not talking about a derabanan violation. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a dispute on eating food that was illegally cooked on Shabbos, and there's a brisa that taught concerning someone who cooks food on Shabbos. In other words, he took the pot of uncooked food and put it onto the stove on Shabbos. If he did so inadvertently, he may eat what is cooked, and if he did so deliberately, he may not eat what's cooked. This is going to be the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and it's lenient. Rabbi Yehuda says, and again, this is going to be the strict opinion, if he cooked the food inadvertently, he may eat it after Shabbos departs on Saturday night, and if he did it deliberately, he may never eat the food ever. So in other words, in Rabbi Yehuda's view, the rabbis are penalizing a deliberate violator by forbidding him from ever enjoying the consequences of his sin. And so everyone else may partake of the food, but this person may not. And only can you partake of this food after Saturday night. Now, Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler says that if he cooked the food inadvertently, that it may be eaten after the Shabbos departs, but only by others and not by him. In other words, he can never benefit or profit from it. But if he did it deliberately, the food may never be eaten, neither by him nor by others. In other words, they're penalizing him, and they're saying that if you cooked on Shabbos, that food is gone forever. Nobody can use it. And there's a Gemara that continues and concludes and says Shmuel ruled in accordance with a stringent view of Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. Now, there's a dissenting opinion. Rav would rule on this matter privately for his groups of students, and the Gemara says that he would rule for his students in accordance with the lenient view of Rabbi Meir. But when Rav lectured publicly in the presence of unlearned people, he would rule in accordance with a stringent view of Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. In other words, he's saying that in reality, the law is really like Rabbi Meir. But in front of people who aren't learned, he would represent the strict restriction. And he did it because he didn't want the unlearned masses, says Pnei Moshe, to not develop a dismissive attitude towards Shabbos restrictions. And so the Bavli, by the way, records that the public ruling of Rav is also going to conform with the view of Rabbi Yehuda rather than that of Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. But anyway, the point is, can you profit from specifically violating it deliberately, or can you profit from it inadvertently, or can you profit from it where you just didn't know the law and you were ignorant? Now, Shmuel is going to be saying that actually it's going to be the stringent view, and it's going to be saying that he can never benefit from it, but that others can. And Rav is going to be saying that no, it's going to be like Rabbi Meir. In other words, he can eat it after Shabbos departs, but if he deliberately ate it, he can never eat that food ever. Have a great day.